Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks.
You forgot one.
Good morning.
I don't know what you forgot.
What you been doing this morning?
Time of day.
Right. So Justin, are you currently on a plane or a spaceship or a satellite or a submarine? Where are you right now?
I am at home. I'm just outside of Atlanta this time, so actually at home for this one.
Really? Okay.
That's why I got to dress up for this one. I had my super shirt handy from
Nice.
Troy. Well, we will give it a few minutes for folks to come in, and I'm going to go ahead and set up my presentation view here.
And Jonathan, you can see what I'm wearing. I have something right after this call that I have to go to.
I asked what you were doing like 3 times and my mic wasn't working.
Oh. Yeah, no, I didn't hear anything. July is our busy month in Boston.
I'm deep in the book studying. My check ride is next Tuesday.
Oh, nice.
Final piece of the puzzle.
Okay, I really love your background, Jeff. That's awesome. And you're muted.
It's way better than what my office looks like at the moment. So
No, well, I'll take a TARDIS.
All right, we'll give it like 1 or 2 more minutes before we get started here. As a note, if you also are like me and like to have the slides to follow along with as we go, you can find the slides and open them up on your own device as we go through the presentation too. Hello, welcome folks. So we're getting just past 15 folks. So I think we can probably go ahead and just get started, and we'll have some more folks jump in, I'm sure. And this is also, this call is also being recorded and transcribed too. So there'll be a summary available after the call as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with this Fedora Council Town Hall meeting. This is a special type of session hosted by the Fedora Council, usually to share, well, this specific one, to share early findings and thoughts about the annual Fedora Contributor Conference, or Flock. Occasionally, the Fedora Council holds public meetings like this one when we want to share updates with the community and invite engaged members of the community to weigh in. If you don't know me already, my name is Justin Wheeler. I'm the Fedora Community Architect at Red Hat, and I'll be presenting for today's town hall. And I'm also a leading member of the Flock organizing team. And I'm actually really excited to be sharing this preview of the survey data today. But there is an important caveat though, and that's that today's presentation is really just a preview. The survey that I'm going to be discussing officially closed on Friday. I started reviewing the full results less than 2 days ago, so I'm not presenting any decisions or actions taken. What I am presenting is my annotated view on this data to help us have a bigger conversation that will continue to unfold on Fedora discussion and in the Fedora Council channels as well. So this town hall is an opportunity to get a first look, but also to influence how we interpret this data. So with that caveat out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. So what is being covered in today's town hall? Here's a brief overview of the agenda. It'll start like a presentation. I'm going to give a quick summary of the changes that we made for this year, as well as some general observations about the event from the data we have so far. After that, I'm going to share 3 targeted insights that are in focus on 1, event goals, 2, virtual engagement, and 3, the 2026 location and dates. I'll briefly present and share some context and data from the survey on each insight, and then we will move to Q&A and audience discussion at the end. As a reminder, please use the raise hand function on Google Meet if you have a clarifying question or comment, or you want to add a detail that adds on what has been shared, but do try to hold your questions until the Q&A section toward the end. So with that, before we get into the results and the data from this year, first, let's just take a quick inventory of the changes that we actually did make this year that were different from past flocks. Quickly reviewing these changes is going to add some context to the responses and the trends that we can see in the response data we've collected so far. So let's dive in. This year, we moved Flock to June for the first time. And for the unaware, Flock typically happens in August, or sometimes we've done it in early September. August was good timing before because it puts us close to the middle of a Fedora Linux release cycle. And putting Flock too close to a release often means that some attendees had a larger workload and weren't able to participate at Flock in the same capacity. It also means that as a community, we're kind of less open to new ideas closer to a release because we're trying to round off the edges on our upcoming release. Also, August tended to work because for many with young children, this was usually a time right before kids go back to school, which made it a somewhat more convenient time for attendees with younger children to attend. So why did we make this change? A big part was to co-locate with another event. I'll cover that and more in a minute. But also late April and early May tend to be times of the year when we are getting a new release out the door. June is typically a little bit of a quieter month for the Fedora community, and we're still early in the development cycle for the next version of Fedora Linux. So by running the conference in June, it actually places us closer to the time following a release. It could be hypothesized that this makes us more flexible and porous as a community to new ideas and collaborations, since we have not yet passed most of the major release schedule deadlines yet. We also reduced from 4 days to 3 days, and we removed one track. These were two structural changes that we made. So this was 1 day less than Flock 2024 in Rochester, but it was the same number of days as Flock 2023 in Cork, Ireland. There were advantages and disadvantages to making a change like this, but I'm just going to explain why, the motivation behind it. And then we also reduced from 4 simultaneous tracks to, at most, 3 tracks at once. So why do we make these changes specifically? One was just on a cost savings aspect. One of the most expensive parts of organizing an event is the audio video, like recording sessions and live streaming them. And we also know that the virtual attendee experience is important to our global community. So being able to record and stream as much of the conference as possible, that really matters for Flock. By reducing both 1 day and 1 track, or in billing terms, 1 additional room in the overall schedule, we were able to shift cost savings into other parts of executing Flock. It also led to a more competitive CFP, or that was kind of our hope, is that reducing Flock by a day and removing 1 track also means that we had to be more competitive in the CFP review process. Thanks to the leadership of IFA, we invited several members of the community to join together with project leadership and helping us make some difficult but important decisions about the content we included at Flock this year. And lastly, it also made the schedule a little bit easier to manage. Of course, as with all events, there's last minute cancellations, people get sick, people don't show up. So when we had a smaller schedule, it was easier to plug some of those last minute holes and gaps, and we were able to, for the most part, keep a pretty full schedule for all 3 of the days that we had. There weren't any major empty gaps in the schedule this year, and we were able to still keep our content programming engaging, interesting, and relevant. We also added a plenary track, which changed how the schedule worked on day 1 and day 2. Half of each day was split up in a single plenary track with no other competing sessions. And this was actually a change that we made in response to community feedback from last year's survey. Lots of people who went in 2024 said it was really overwhelming that, they wanted to spend this time in the hallway track and talking with people. But then there were all these sessions and so many sessions and speakers that it was just hard to balance those 2 things. Also, some speakers in 2024 were scheduled against other popular sessions that had panel discussions, and some of those speakers were unfortunate about timing and didn't have many people come to their sessions. So why do we make this change? Why do we add a plenary track? One is for visibility. The CFP review team could elevate our top choice sessions into channeled focus sessions that invited all of the Flock community to engage and take part. It also gave us, allowed us to give a larger platform to Fedora contributors doing important work in the project that others might not know about. On messaging, it also makes it a little bit easier for some of the Fedora leadership to help deliver key information and promote long-term strategy for the community. Like our panel sessions with FESCO and Council, I think are good examples, like where we can have some really clear back and forth discussion and engagement with the community. And by having a single plenary track, we could have more of these town hall style discussions with project leadership and also identify areas where maybe our messaging is not actually aligned. And lastly, unity. There's a special feeling about being in a single room together with most everyone at the conference together. It builds a positive, collaborative, and inspiring energy that goes both for attendees and speakers. And for speakers, it's a really great privilege to speak on the plenary track because you get to capture the attention of most everyone at the conference. And lastly, the biggest change that I think folks are probably aware of is that we preceded another event this year. We tried to co-locate or co-sequence our event with DevConf CZ in the nearby city of Brno. So this was definitely one of the biggest changes that we made. Why did we do it this year? One, there is a little bit of a special relationship between the Fedora community and DevConf CZ. Both Flock and DevConf CZ are important events to the Fedora community. Moving them closer together affords some the opportunity to attend both, or people who would come to Flock can volunteer with DevConf, and we can have more overlap there, where normally they might not get to attend both in the same year. At least for some, travel would become more convenient. There was also some overlap in organizers and common resources between the two events. Moving them closer to each other allowed the Flock organizing team to lean into the ongoing planning work for the other event, and then we could try to better share some of our planning resources and organize our communication. So we moved them closer together really to ask the question, in this new model, what things have more support and what things have less support in this co-located approach. And lastly, it also kind of helped us better separate the contributor and the user audiences. From the very beginning, back in 2014, when we started doing Flock, it was designed to be the doing conference for Fedora, where Fedora contributors show up, connect with each other, and hold the conversations that drive the project forward. While users are, of course, important, we talk differently about Fedora as contributors than we do as users of Fedora Linux. By co-locating with DevConf CZ, the Flock CFP review committee was able to prioritize contributor content over general user content, with the implicit messaging that user-focused content was probably a better fit for something like DevConf. So that's a little bit on the kind of the changes that we did make this year going into the conference. But let's talk a little bit about some of the general insights that we were able to take a look at based on the data so far. What you're about to see is a mix of some of my own review and analysis, along with several major contributions from another Flock co-organizer, Dorka Volokova, and ComOps contributor, Robert Wright. So at a quick glance, we had 156 attendees this year, which was actually a 39% increase from our numbers in 2024 in Rochester. We actually had about a 73% turnout rate, which, as far as these things go, especially for an event that doesn't have a required ticket cost, this is a really great number and shows that folks that register for Flock are usually pretty committed to going. We had over 50 sessions, which included presentations and workshops and some keynotes. And approximately roughly a quarter of our attendees were actually at their very first Flock this year, which is also interesting to me. We also had the support of 10 sponsors who continue to invest in the health and growth of the Fedora community by helping sponsor the costs for organizing Flock. So this is just at a quick glance, but let's take a look at some of the data that we have from the survey. This infographic from Robert Wright shows the types of roles that people identify as having in the community that attended Flock. Interestingly, many people who filled the survey did identify as Fedora Linux users, so that was an interesting theme. However, this does include in-person and virtual attendees as well. Some areas of contribution were well represented, like package maintenance, although one could probably suggest that this label needs to be broken down into smaller, more meaningful contribution labels than just package maintenance to try to better understand that. However, several parts of our community definitely had really low representation, despite their importance to the overall functioning of Fedora, like design and globalization. Thinking ahead to 2026, this chart gives some inspiration on areas where we might have room to grow further and expand our audience as a community or as a conference. This next infographic from Robert shows the average rating of by in-person attendees, what they gave on the types of session programming we offered. So generally, people who were in Prague really liked the content, giving it roughly on average about a 4 for most of the sessions. So this was an improvement from 2024 on sessions and especially on workshops and hackfests. There was definitely an increase from last year's satisfaction on workshops and hackfests. And this is, to me, an early indicator that the approach in being more selective in our content and reducing one day and having a more competitive CFP was actually successful. You can expect that there will be more detailed analysis on this one to come. So expect that there'll be more to dig deeper on this soon. Also, I think it's, again, worth calling out that the hallway track is an incredibly important aspect to Flock. And just looking at the chat, folks with the emoji reactions, do folks know what hallway track is when I say that? Can I get like thumbs up or thumbs down? Like, do people generally understand that term? Okay, then I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But basically, it's the hallway track, the socializing time, informal networking, and that's incredibly important for members of the Fedora community. It consistently ranks very highly in all of our post-event surveys, and I view this as an indicator that the high value of that in-person, face-to-face interaction can have for people who spend so much of their time the rest of the year communicating over matrix and emails and video calls. So the opportunity for these high bandwidth conversations and casual networking is where some of the best plans get made. This infographic from Robert kind of builds on that, of showing the importance of the hallway track based on how many previous flocks a respondent has attended. So this is actually, I thought this was really interesting, is that the more flocks that people attend, the more that generally the hallway track was more valuable for them. And also, first note that there were actually no answers that said the hallway track was not valuable. Like, everyone got at least some value from it. So interestingly, what we see is that the more someone participates and spends time going to Flock and engaging in the community, the more that hallway track becomes more valuable, with approximately 4/5 of people who attended at least 4 flocks identifying that nothing is more important to them at Flock than the hallway track. However, we also see some generally strong numbers from folks who are newcomers to Flock. Slightly over half of the respondents who had never attended a Flock before also identified the hallway track as like the most important part of the conference. So this, to me, seems to reflect the nature of our kind of decentralized global community and the great value that comes from bringing our community together and being able to bridge those gaps between people who are newcomers and longtime experienced contributors in the community. This final infographic from Robert shows the average enjoyment rating for the various social events that the Flock team organized for attendees. While you could say that this graph has little strategic value to Flock or Fedora, I think it actually indicates something incredibly important for a community that has this unique composure that Fedora has. To me, it indicates that our community is fun. And the results that I see on this chart tell me that the extra effort spent in organizing fun does have an impact on our community. Reading the responses from the survey, many responses highlighted the social events as some of the most memorable aspects of Flock. And events like Flock thrive when our community of contributors feel connected, when we can break down barriers and help our community connect across diverse nationalities, languages, and cultures. This helps us work together better and collaborate more effectively as a community. So making sure that there is scheduled time to actually have fun is really important to maintaining the human connections that keep Fedora thriving and going for over 20 years. You may come to other conclusions, but this is my own view that I see when I look at this infographic. So again, a special thanks to Dorka Volokova and Robert Wright for compiling some of those statistics and helping visualize them in some of those interesting and creative ways. So now with the general observations behind us, I want to shift to the 3 targeted insights. This is where the opportunities for audience participation are going to begin before we get to the Q&A. So if you have questions or things that you want to help us kind of brainstorm on, this is also the Q&A and audience discussion will be a great time to focus on these 3 insights. So first, we'll focus on the event goals of Flock. Currently, we have 3 defined. And an important caveat here is that these are the same event goals that we've been using since 2017 or 2018. So keep that in mind as I share these with you. So what you see on this slide is the written goals for Flock. In theory, the goals are messaging, engineer collaboration, and project participation. At a first glance, they seem pretty harmless, like yes, all these things are good for the Fedora community, good strategic messaging, engineers working together, and onboarding new contributors. We want all of these things, right? So, however, while they are good aspirations, they're not necessarily goals. Just to use kind of an example here, I think many people are familiar with the SMART goal framework: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And this acronym SMART is a useful self-check if what we're describing as a goal is something that can realistically be achieved. If we use the SMART goal framework, these 3 goals don't really serve Flock well. They're not specific because there's no specified technology areas or what things engineers collaborate on or how to actually participate in Fedora. They're not measurable. Like, we could come up with some proxy metrics to make a guess on some of these things and whether we're meeting them, but there's not an easy or straightforward way of measuring these goals without a lot more direction. They're not achievable because if these are characteristics that are generally good, like how can we tell when we're done? Like, how do we know if we meet these goals? There's a lot of guesswork to determine that. They are relevant though. Like, the goals written as now do sound like great aspirations, like they make sense, but they're not time bound either. The goals are things we should be doing, and these are goals that are things we should be doing in perpetuity, always doing these things, therefore making them an endless moving target. So we need goals to have better, more clear starts and ends. So now you maybe get a sense of why the goals today aren't meeting the need of the moment. And it's also an exciting time to think about what the event goals might be that actually better serve the community. So the conclusion you could take away on this one is that it's probably time to propose some better event goals for Flock for 2026 and beyond. And that's part of what I want to open the discussion for today. Second targeted insight, a quick one on virtual engagement. This one has been, I think also just to give some like context on this one first, for many of you who have been around for a few years, like during the COVID years, we were doing Nest with Fedora, which was our online virtual event. And because we weren't doing in-person travel, we got to spend a lot of time really practicing our craft on virtual events. And there's all these people all around the world who are, engaged and interested in Fedora. But of course, we can't always bring everyone to one single place in the world. So that virtual engagement piece of Flock is something, as we've gone back to in-person events, making sure that we keep some open bridge or connection for folks who can't join us in person. It is an important aspect of Flock. So I think in theory, the virtual engagement strategy that we've tried to take is thinking about accessibility, connection and engagement, and recognition. So accessibility, like our virtual engagement really, and I'm sharing these as in theory, whether we're actually meeting all of these things today in the best way that we could be is definitely up for discussion. And that's one of the things that I would like you to also bring into the Q&A and audience discussion section as well. But accessible, easy to discover and find. Like, people can figure out how to jump into the virtual event without wringing their hands. It's available to a community that's on all over parts of the globe. Open platforms, open source platforms preferred, with as few barriers to using them as possible, and a conference experience that fits into the existing communication channels that we use as contributors. Connected and engaged, that, it's important that people feel a part of the project and part of the community. and that the virtual sessions for people who are, sometimes waking up really early or staying up super late, that they're getting value out of going and attending and watching these sessions, or asking things to speakers virtually. There's also should be opportunities to participate and engage with the sessions and the speakers, and clear communication about how virtual attendees can participate. And lastly, recognition, people who go to the event get swag and, Flock goodies and stickers and all this kind of stuff. And that's meaningful. That really matters to people. It's like it's a form of recognition. Several contributors also who do a lot for the community cannot always travel or are unable to travel, but they're still an important part of the project. And lastly, thinking about, from a recognition point of view, having an inclusion model that's adapted to this global nature of the Fedora community. So these are kind of our theoretical goals and challenges with virtual engagement with Flock. We've been live streaming the event since we've come back from COVID in 2023. We've used Matrix increasingly as part of our chat platform for the conference, both for in-person attendees, but also for virtual engagement as well. So we've tried, and we added a volunteer role this year as Matrix chat moderator, which was someone who also tried to help watch for questions and bring them up and ask them live for people who were watching the live stream and asking in the Matrix chat. So we have, each year we steadily make improvements on this, but this is also looking at the survey data. This is definitely a point of contention. Like, the value of the virtual experience is very mixed. This is one of the things I hope that we hope to share more about as we continue looking at and working on this data, trying to understand the value of the virtual experience and the work that goes into pulling it off, and making sure that we're trying to make the most for people who can't be there in person. So again, this is one of the other two targeted insights, and this is something that I would really like to invite questions and comments on how we could improve this for future flocks. And lastly, the big one, and I think is on a lot of people's mind, is about the location and the dates. This one I'm definitely going to put a caveat on, because there's a lot of complicated geopolitical aspects that are going into this, and sometimes every week it feels like there's something different going on in the world. So again, I remind you, as I said at the start of this presentation, this is really just a preview. There's not decisions having been made or anything that's been firmly done, but this is just trying to take an annotated view on what the data we have so far is telling us. So some historical context on the old recipe for Flock, how we did it from basically 2013, or 2013 until COVID. Flock typically happens in August. It alternates each year between the United States and the EU. It changes cities every year, preferably ones that have good international air connections. It goes to cities where we have local contributors who can help us and advise us. It happens, the venue is a hotel, which features the conference venue. And there's probably some other small details that I forgot. If we look at what changed and what remained true for this year, we changed that it happens in August. We did make the alternation. We went from Rochester, New York last year back to the Czech Republic this year. We did change the cities, although it was a repeat city from 2014. We went back to Prague, actually. We, again, went to a city that we had lots of local connections that could help us make the most of the city and the venue. And we did although this one was also kind of like partially true, because I know a lot of people weren't able to stay in the event hotel. There was a hotel that was connected to the conference venue, or at least even the people who weren't at the conference hotel were able to find hotels pretty close by. So for the most part, we didn't change a lot there, but let's take a look at some of the early observations from the data. So there's definitely a North American dilemma that we're looking at for next year. Less than 10% of respondents selected a US location. And I left a couple of just excerpts from comments. So, there was a part in the last section of the survey where people could share comments about their answers for the location or the dates and so on. lots of people had many, many different opinions about the 2026 changes, as I would expect. But one of the most consistent themes that I observed looking at the data so far is that there's a very high degree of skepticism and fear and uncertainty about travel to the United States. So this is something that's, again, as Fedora being a global community with contributors and people involved in the project from all over the world, ensuring like the psychological safety and physical safety of our contributors in some cases too is really important. And the US, because of the current situation, may be a challenging place to put Flock next year. I'll also say that like from now that I have a few Flocks behind me, Europe is also much more affordable from a budget perspective for the things that we tend to pay for and what we get out of those payments. So we also end up usually running a more lean event in Europe. And sometimes that translates into more available funds for things like travel funding or other things that we do at the event. So it is another aspect to consider as well, beyond the travel skepticism to the US, that we tend to pull off a much more economical event in Europe. And again, that was one of the things that we definitely observed from all the responses. About 61% of respondents selected an EU location. And for what it's worth, the other big group here was 22% of people that had no preference. So the repeat in Europe was definitely, if you combine that with people who maybe had no preference, like that's almost like, just a little bit above 4/5 of all survey respondents. So some people had, different, there's a lot of different opinions here. I just took a quick excerpt of some of the ones that stood out to me. This is one of the things that I do hope that we can share a little bit more about, is what people had to say and some of the comments and the feedback in the future detailed analyses and reports that we'll publish on this. But, there are people who actually thought that actually Brno was the ideal location, moving it closer to DevConf in the same city. But we had lots of people who were also favorable with Prague, although also wouldn't mind an openness to other ideas and locations too. On the topic of going to new places, this is part of my interpretation on this data. But repeating a location in 2026 could allow us to think of going to a new place in 2027. Repeating the same city and the venue, it gives us an organizing advantage that we don't have to start over from square one to organize the event. In a new city we haven't organized in before, with a new event venue, with new relationships, new vendors, new contracts, there's definitely a huge time saving and resource conservation that we could have by reusing some of the same logistics as this year. And it would allow us to think bigger for 2027, but also it would make us more agile and hopefully able to have earlier timelines even for next year. Hopefully like an earlier CFP, and this will be part of what we will continue to talk about, but trying to move things earlier so if people have more time to plan, more time to prepare. That's the goal that we're trying to reach. So, this is, again, kind of my hypothetical proposed false and true. If we look back at those typical, the old guard recipe of Flock, if we were to go back and say we go back somewhere to Europe again, which seems probable, we probably would keep it in June. Actually, June was surprisingly it was the most popular choice in the survey for time of year of the month range we offered. The least popular times actually were July and August, probably because of summer vacations or expensive travel. I don't know, but that's part of what I hope we can share a little bit more on. We would not be alternating if we went back to Europe, which would kind of disrupt that historical trend that we've had. Maybe we change cities, maybe we don't. I think this is going to be one of the things that we have an extended conversation about. But I definitely think there's strong advantages and disadvantages for both. What does seem constant, though, places where we have local contributors. That's a really important part. And also keeping the conference hotel together with the conference venue, I think is a really big perk for keeping things together and making I think it's just a very big convenience win in doing that, and it keeps the conference more close together, or the community closer together. So with that, that's some of the early insights. I know, like, for a lot of you, you probably have more questions. This probably doesn't answer a lot of your questions. So this is where I really want to turn over. We have about half an hour left in this slot. So again, if you want to ask a question or add a comment or share some of your feedback, please use the raise hand function on Google Meet, and we'll use that to direct the discussion. And I believe we also have some other members of the Fedora Council here as well, that an open call to the other council members. If you want to jump in on a question, you're welcome to. I say that as the two council members have raised their hands, but David, you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, so thank you for all that information. It was really interesting. On the location, like, the only thing I want to add about the location that I think is worth considering is new cities. Like, I don't want to get into the North America versus Europe thing. I'm fine with Europe, but changing the location that we go, even if it's every other year or something, has the advantage of attracting longtime contributors who get bored with going to the same place over and over and over again. They start to say, like, you know, I don't want to do it. I can't do it. And it opens the door to making it more social with, you know, activities that we can do for that community building stuff. If it's new, if it's the same city every time, it's just, you know, pretty soon you've kind of done everything except for the new people. So that's the only thing I wanted to add about the location. That was what was appealing when we started Flock after FudCon, is that it was kind of a new adventure for all of us, going to a new city each time. But yeah, I know it's difficult. I know everything about this is difficult. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah. And, you know, I think an important caveat here to underline as we continue to have this conversation is that, you know, let's say, and there's the hypothetical scenario where we do go back to the same city next year. We go back to Prague and we do that. There's nothing that's saying that we're locking in on this forever. And now that we have one city, that we're always going to be in Prague, and that's where it's always going to be. You know, I think probably part of the conversation is going to be exploring the idea of, again, like, if we did a repeat in Prague, or we tried to go closer to DevConf, even in Brno, I think there'd be an intention to think bigger about a new location the following year, and having that time and capacity to, even just for 1 year, to better organize and have like a little bit more structure on the organization work, I think would help make it easier for us to say, like, hey, let's maybe think about, like, I was seeing some comments in the chat about Flock and APAC, you know, like having a better organized Flock in even just in the same city as the last year would make it easier for us to actually be ready to grow and scale the conference to go somewhere new and different. Because I do think, you know, as someone who was also a contributor and going to the different cities for so long before I was in this role, I know that's really important to people, and it helps connect us with people from different parts of the world as well who are Fedora contributors. So I definitely hear you. I recognize that is like a very valuable part of Flock. So maybe, you know, part of the conversation we'll continue to have is maybe we do it just for 1 year, or maybe not. We'll see. Yeah. Miro, you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. I'll respond to this discussion, although I wanted to say something else first. At EuroPython, usually the place stays the same for 2 years in a row, and then it changes. I say usually because it's not the rule. But everybody froze. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yes, I can hear
you. Yes, yeah, okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So it gives you a good benefit because you save some energy. We're doing it for the second time in the same place, at the same city, whatever. It's definitely easier, but it doesn't get so boring as having it 10 years at the same location. So like doing 2 years in Prague and then 2 years in, I don't know, Toronto, and then 2 years in wherever, it doesn't really matter. It's a good compromise between alternating and not alternating at all. So just a tip. And the thing I actually wanted to start with is that there's a big contradiction in some of the things we want to achieve. And one is to get more hallway tracks, spend a day together somewhere else, whatever, because that's something that people find important, almost the most important thing of the event. And on the other hand, as someone who unfortunately could not attend this year, I experienced it firsthand as a virtual attendee, and I must say that the hallway part of Flock was not there. I could see the talks, I could maybe ask some questions, talk a little bit with other virtual attendees, but that's just something entirely different than being part of the hallway thing. So the more special things you do for hallway, like one day out, the harder it will be to participate as a virtual attendee. And this will be challenging. I'm not saying I have a solution for this. I'm just pointing out that this is definitely going kind of against each other.
You know, it's a great point. I think the data that I saw on the virtual participation, virtual attendees as well, really matches what you're describing too. So my hope is, you know, as I kind of called out, is like, this is definitely an area of focus about how we can improve the conference experience. I think this will be one of the things that in the subsequent looks at the data, looking at the feedback we got on the virtual experience as well, and how we can try to improve that or make it more useful. Like, I don't know if we'll be able to like replicate that hallway track experience fully. I've seen creative ideas before. This is again also one of those things that doing a repeat location could mean that we have more time to think about the hybrid virtual aspect too. But it is a very good consideration. And if we're going to spend the effort to try to make a virtual hybrid option, we should make sure that we're getting the most out of that and that it's worth the effort. Justin, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Two things actually now, because I'll just respond to what Miro just said quickly. I do understand how it's going to be incredibly difficult to get the hallway track to be satisfactory from a virtual standpoint. We do actually have, with the Fedora social channel and a few other things, there are ways to do hallway tracks virtually, but the people who are there in person are really not going to participate in that as often during the conference because it is such a rare thing that we are together in person. It's just a difficult problem to solve. The other part that I was going to point out is perhaps if we don't want to do the same city, twice in a row, we could go back to a city we went to recently. So, I mean, to David's point, if you move it to another location in Europe, you're attracting a different area or a different group of people who are local as well. So even if we were to go back to, say, Cork, that gives you an advantage of we were just there, so it should be fairly simple to organize compared to a completely new city. But we're also basically on the other side of Europe. And so you might be able to attract the other people there, and that might help solve that problem some. That was all.
Yeah, that's a good input there too. And that'll definitely be part, I think, of the location conversation that we continue to have over the next couple of weeks too. Bex, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I want to change topics on this a little bit more. And that is, I think that the focus on contributors at this year's Flock really showed through. Like, I appreciated it. I thought it was a better Flock overall for that reason. There weren't talks that felt like they weren't for the audience in attendance, because the user audience has typically been very poor in terms of numbers at Flocks. That said, you made a comment about how there was an implicit statement that user talks should go to DevConf. What can we do to make that explicit if that is the place that we as a project want to talk to our users? And I'm not suggesting that we should bend Flock to make that successful, but we should make sure that Flock is set up in such a way that we are also able to be successful if we want to have a user-focused event as part of something like DevConf Check, which I actually think could be a good idea, at least as a way to start figuring out if a user-focused event even makes sense for this community.
That is a really great question too. And I do think, again, some of the intention of this year of setting a intentional focus. I mean, we've always tried to keep Flock as a contributor conference. That was the way it started, but really trying to make that a clear guiding principle for the event has been really important. However, I think how we could try to do that and make it better, like it was implicit in the sense that like if you've been involved in the Fedora community and you know about these two events, like there's and I'm also seeing lots of chatter in the chat on this as well. I think there's a variety of opinions that exist on this too. But I think if there's a big if here, and I'd say that's assuming we kind of go back to that model where at least we're in the Czech Republic again next year in June, and we're right before or after DevConf. I think that would be the indication that we really need to make it more explicit at the time that both events are starting to do their CFPs. I think it's probably more relevant for Flock to make that kind of like gentle push towards DevConf, which is kind of the bigger event in terms of attendance. I mean, it is the bigger event by far on levels of attendance. So I think trying to make that indication clear to people who are submitting content, because we also get a lot of submissions from people as well that tend to be very user-focused content. And especially since we toned down on the number of days and we reduced a track, we weren't able to like, and Flock 2024, I think we had more of that kind of content because we had more spaces to fill, much more spaces to fill. So, you know, I think, should we go with that approach of going again to the Czech Republic, one city or another, and close to DevConf? I think that would be a conversation that, again, knowing that there is an overlap of some of the same organizers, this is something that we should make more explicit and try to help set up both projects to have that, you know, have that clear communication, or both events to have that clear communication. And, you know, we make that more explicit basically, because we did not do that this time. That was true. So it's a good point of consideration as we get closer on the location piece. Brendan, you wanna jump in?
Yeah, so just two comments. First, for location, there from the chat, people have observed that there are other parts of North America that could be considered outside the United States, and also APAC is a place we've never done a Flock before, but I think it would be awesome if we could. So just a little feedback there that we haven't really kind of talked about too much. And then just for hallway track, we kind of use hallway track for a very broad set of conversations. So what do we actually mean by that? Sometimes we mean we meet up with friends and talk about just friend stuff, and sometimes we come out of a talk and we want to like have more conversation about it than we can. And so, you know, it's possible to solve that one with something like an overtime space where we have a little bit more time between talks. And then finally, there's I think this is the biggest one that I see in hallway track, and that is, there should have been a talk for this. Why wasn't there a talk for this? We should get together and talk about this thing. Like, who's had that experience, right? I think we've all had that experience if we've been to a few of these. And there are actually facilitator tools for doing this one. So O'Reilly kind of started this with Bar Camp, got formalized into unconferences. There's also Lean Coffee. And the general idea for all of these is that you put a bunch of ideas on a board and you vote on the things that are most interesting, and you actually make time to talk about those things. And so as conference organizers, all you have to do is allocate a block of time and then provide the facilitation for the board, which can happen virtually. So we have like virtual attendance, and then we can actually have some of those talks that didn't get green-lighted officially, but we found out in the course of the event that we actually needed to talk about that thing. So that'd probably be a way to solve part of this problem.
Yeah, there was a lot to unpack there, but I think on the first one, on the other North American locations, that's very true. We did only have one US city in the poll. I will say though, we have looked at Canada and Mexico previously. I mean, Mexico is it North America? Is it LATAM? I'm not quite sure, but we've looked at both of these countries, and we almost did a Flock in Mexico City in 2024. That was the original plan. And we also looked at Montreal for that year, and Canada ended up being more cost prohibitive than I would have expected. Even in some of the, that was definitely the part that made Canada harder when we were looking in 2024. And then Mexico, we had challenges. I think that like part of the event contracting piece made that complicated, and maybe there'd be another approach to Mexico, but this is the kind of thing that, again, folding back to the previous conversation, trying to do a more familiar location next year would allow us the bandwidth to think bigger, which I think connects to your next thing on kind of like, APAC and other regions. Like to me, I think when I say think big, I really mean like think big for what 2027 could look like in terms of where we go or where we try to build out our contributor community further. There's lots of time until we get to that point. But again, like, I think that's why like having these conversations now and trying to talk about it and get more organized for next year, I think those are going to be the things that allow us to be ready to move to another region. Because also there's a big emphasis that we're going to need very strong local teams to be able to pull that off. Like there are certain things that we have to have someone in the country to negotiate things for us and do contracts for us. Like there are certain skills that we need to have in place in these regions that we do not have today. So again, by focusing on somewhere that's more familiar next year, maybe we can try to formalize ourselves a little bit better, get a little better organized, and maybe think about something that's a little bit out of the historical trend of the US EU, perhaps. There was a lot of other pieces there, but I think, did I cover that well, or is there?
It's totally the travel half. The other half was what we do about the hallway track, and is lean coffee the answer?
Yeah, so I think this is a great one actually, because there was some interesting thoughts that echoed this in the survey comments that I read about people who were like, like I wanted to have this place to go in, like talk with someone and open up our laptops and hack for a few hours. And while we did have a kind of spare room that was not well communicated, sometimes people would have like private conversations in there, and it wasn't the most open space. I think like having a more, the idea was like maybe we have, instead of doing 3 tracks, we do 2 tracks, and then one of them is just like a hack room. We'll provide like power and like good network, and or thinking about this kind of way of like having a more like open space for people to like go and set up with their laptops, get some work done. Like I was seeing lots of people do that on the floor in chairs. Like people were hacking, like pulling things out wherever they could get space. So I think that is a really good way of like to think about how could we make the use of the space more effective for what people are trying to use or what people are trying to do in the space. So maybe, that was just an idea that I've had, is that like, maybe we have like a hack session track and people can just go in there and we provide the power and it's just open whenever we have the breakout tracks and not the plenary. Like I do think there's some really interesting ideas there, and thinking about how we can make things more interactive, or maybe do like kind of that ad hoc kind of bar camp or community leadership summit style of approach. I think there's some interesting ideas there. I won't promise anything on that yet, but I do think I think it's thinking in the right direction for keeping the event dynamic and relevant to what people want to talk about. Aoife, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I'll try and keep it quick because we're just approaching the top of the hour. With regards to the workshops, hackfests, hallway track, etc., I think it might be in our best interest to look at adding an additional day, or certainly half day. I really like the idea of having that's breakout room kind of available for ad hoc use. I think that might serve an awful lot of, hey, we should really talk about this thing that Brendan had mentioned. Personally, from this flock this year, I really liked how the days were structured. But if we are to take out a track and add in a room, I feel like we could lose potentially a lot of content that people did enjoy. So I would strongly consider looking at a 3.5 day event at a minimum if we're going to up the hallway track availability. That's my 2 cents on that one. On the travel piece as well, just reading the chat as well, and I agree with Jeff that, yeah, we are already on the back foot for 2026 planning. If we've done a survey, we've asked people to contribute where and asked them specifically where would they like to go for 2026, and we have the answers, not necessarily the exact location. Would it be in our best interest to now focus on, okay, I think June was probably the best answered, so we can assume June for 2026, and then given the percentage that answered and the European city, would it not just be easier and more worth our while to just narrow that down? Because why did we ask if we're going to ignore the answers?
That's good. Now I was just starting to peek at some of the chat and peek along at some of the chat there too as you were sharing that too. And I think that's going to be also an important focus. Yeah, I think we probably have, just looking at the time, we'll probably have time for 2 more questions, and then I'm just going to wrap up and close this out for the hour. Davide?
Hi. I want to second what Aoife said. I didn't get to attend Flock this year, but in past years, something that was personally challenging for me was I would end up being involved in like 2 or 3 workshops. Those would be overlapping with talks, and I would end up missing talks I would have liked to attend. And I love workshops, but workshops effectively lock you in a room for like a couple of hours. And that means it's a couple of hours you can't actually mingle and do hallway track, you just do a focused thing. So having a dedicated day or half day for that, I think would be really valuable, because I think the workshops are great. And we got a lot of really good work done. Like, for example, I remember both them for multimedia and for political bills the last time I was in the room. That was really, really helpful. On location, one thing that I wanted to state for this group that I brought up in the past when talking to people one-to-one, my concern with doing Flock very close to DevConf is that Flock and DevConf have strongly overlapping audiences. And by doing them close, you kind of rob people of an opportunity to have another time of the year to see people in person. Like for me, a big value of these events is that I get to see people in person that I only see a handful of times a year. And if these events are back to back and I see the same people at both events in the same week, that's not really useful in my opinion. It would be way more useful to have an event in June and an event in August, and then I have 2 opportunities to see people over the year. And that's great. And that also makes it easier, I think, to have more clarity on what is a better fit for what. Because I think right now it's not like, I agree, I don't think it's entirely clear. Like I had no idea that DevConf was meant for user presentations, for example. Having been at DevConf, I don't feel like most of the talks at least I was at were user presentations. So I think if you wanted to do a user event, I think a user event makes a lot more sense collocated with like a broad scope conference like FOSDEM or Scale, like those kind of events that attract like general public, so to speak. I love DevConf, but I don't think DevConf is a general public kind of conference. And Flock certainly is not a general public kind of conference.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely fair feedback. And some of the other responses, like we definitely, this is again, part of what I want to provide in the follow-up reports, but like there was definitely a subset of people who were really, on one hand, they were dissatisfied with doing any kind of co-location with Flock next to any kind of event. There were people who didn't like it, but only because it was too far apart. And, you know, I think part of the challenge there is that for some people, like, yes, like some people are able to do the travel more and have more opportunities to meet people. But also something I observe is that for a lot of people, like this is it. This is the one time, like Flock is the reason they'll do their, at least people who are in our contributor community, I'm referring to, that like this is kind of the big opportunity when they travel in the year, or this is kind of the big thing. And they don't do much. They won't go and travel or go to many other events for the rest of the year. So for that kind of persona, that type of contributor, it allows them to do both. And again, I think that was part of the challenge too, is that like we had too many days apart, and then that also added some friction for people who, the people who did want to do both or had the value in that, had a harder time, I think, to get the value out of it because there were these 4 days between the 2 events. But I definitely hear you that like having the sharing with the other event and not having like a clear focus on which audience is for which event is a challenge. And that's why I think one of the focuses or one of the topics we'll continue to talk about is about the event goals and trying to be more clear about what is it we're actually trying to achieve and get out of Flock. I think that's going to make this kind of conversation much easier to have. So that's where I would say, like, keep an eye out for that topic. And also, I forgot to just to come back to what Aoife said on the 3.5 days. Like, you know, in the idea that we did do that with DevConf and Flock, like maybe there's a way we could play around, like using that day, like renting somewhere in Prague or Brno that people could like work. I don't know, like it's part of the things we could continue to think about in terms of working closer together. But I know we're close on time. So maybe Davide, really quick, and then I'm gonna just wrap us up.
Yeah, just something else that I forgot to mention that I thought was relevant. Like something that was specifically challenging for me this year, and I've talked to a bunch of people that also found it challenging, was that this year we had Red Hat Summit in Boston, then we had like a week, then we had Flock, then we had like a week, then we had DevConf. And like, that means that if you wanted to do all of them, you'd be traveling for effectively like a month. And like, that is not viable. Like, and I say this as someone that doesn't have kids, that has a very flexible schedule. Like I cannot swing that. I've done that once years ago and it was awful, and I will not do that again. So I think there's definitely a balance to strike, and I know there's a lot of events that compete against, but we have to be mindful that like people at the end of the day end up having to pick and choose things if they are scheduled to close, because it's just the nature of what it is, and like people have conflicting priorities. People also have to get like, going to conference is not the only thing to do all year, so you know, there's that too to consider. That was the only thing I also wanted to bring up, but I appreciate Justin, and thanks for clarifying that, and I look forward to further discussions on this.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. So with that, I think that will take us here to the end of the slot. So a quick thank you for your attention today. And as a reminder, as I've said a couple times throughout this presentation, more detailed analysis of the event survey results will take place over the next few weeks. If this sounds like something that's actually interesting to you, come and join us in the Fedora community operations team to learn more about the work we're doing, to review the survey data. We can share some of that with folks if you want to play around with it. We're actually looking for volunteers to help us with some of this data review and analysis. So do check out the Fedora community operations team. This recording of today's call and the transcript summary will be shared publicly in the coming week, so do keep an eye out for them. And again, thank you for your attention, folks, and we will see you all around in the Fedoraverse. Have a great rest of your week, folks. Take care.